unrecognized Aboriginal fallen warriors during domestic frontier conflicts against the same ideals ANZAC fought for and commemorates. Yet Australia steals an Aboriginal iconic cultural piece to represent themselves at the exclusion of those fallen Aboriginal warriors. Aboriginal opinions on ANZAC span from hatred over its exclusion of Aboriginal resistance warriors, to personal love rooted in family service histories, while the soldiers who enlisted both Aboriginal and white largely lacked any clear understanding of the imperial objectives they were sent to die for. Some Aboriginal people hate ANZAC because its official ceremonies and memorials elevate the colonial military tradition that directly opposed their ancestors' armed defense of land and sovereignty, leaving frontier dead unnamed and uncommemorated at the national level. Others remain completely unbothered, viewing ANZAC as irrelevant to their daily lives or contemporary struggles and choosing neither to engage nor protest. A further group likes ANZAC in a mild positive sense, appreciating the general recognition of courage and mateship without deep personal investment. Still others love ANZAC passionately because a great-grandfather or other direct relative fought in the First or Second World War, wearing the uniform and surviving or dying in service, which creates tangible family pride. Approximately 1,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men enlisted in the First World War, and over 3,000 in the Second World War despite legal barriers and widespread discrimination at the time. Those who did fight, including the Aboriginal enlistees, joined for the same pragmatic reasons that drove the majority of white soldiers: pay, adventure, escape from poverty, and the vague promise of equality or citizenship rights that Australia denied them both before and after the wars. Post-service, many Aboriginal veterans faced continued exclusion from soldier settlement schemes and veterans' benefits, reinforcing the disconnect. Neither Aboriginal nor white recruits typically grasped the full geopolitical complexities of alliances, treaties, or empire preservation that propelled the conflicts. Recruitment relied on propaganda posters, economic necessity, and peer pressure rather than informed consent. The result is that personal attachment through family lineage coexists with institutional realities that treat Aboriginal service as secondary, while the core ignorance of the fighters themselves remains a shared historical fact across both groups. Conflict of interests. Official ANZAC doctrine frames the sacrifices of uniformed service members as defense of the Australian nation and its foundational principles of British-derived governance, legal systems, and territorial integrity established through settlement. Those same principles directly clashed with Aboriginal assertions of prior occupation and sovereignty, making any national-level inclusion of frontier fallen Aboriginal warriors into ANZAC events or memorials a direct contradiction of the narrative that portrays the Australian state as legitimately defended without acknowledging internal opposition. Aboriginal people engaged in armed resistance precisely to counter the imposition of those ideals, which involved systematic dispossession of land resources and cultural autonomy through policies enacted by the colonial authorities that later became the Australian government. The exclusion persists because integrating remembrance of those who fought against the establishment of the very Australia ANZAC claims to protect would require rewriting the commemorative framework to equate domestic defenders of Indigenous sovereignty with overseas expeditionary forces who upheld it. This structural barrier ensures that ANZAC remains a celebration of unity around settler-derived national identity while compartmentalizing Aboriginal casualties from frontier engagements as outside the scope of official honour. The result is a deliberate policy choice that prioritizes preservation of the ANZAC ideal over equitable recognition of all historical combatants on Australian soil. Aboriginal perspectives acknowledge the bravery of ANZAC participants in foreign conflicts, yet consistently identify the selective application of remembrance standards as the core hypocrisy preventing parallel national tributes to their own resistance heroes. No amendment to the governing legislation or institutional guidelines has altered this boundary despite repeated advocacy highlighting the mismatch between defended ideals and opposed realities. In summary, Australia maintains strict separation in ANZAC memorials and celebrations to avoid confronting how the ideals ANZAC defends were the exact targets of Aboriginal resistance, thereby rendering any national remembrance of those fallen Aboriginal warriors incompatible with the official definition of what the commemorations represent. The conflict of interests intensifies because the Australian Army and ANZAC Mounted Division explicitly adopted the boomerang as an official insignia and combined emblem, while the same national framework refuses equivalent war honour status to Aboriginal warriors who fought against those forces on domestic soil. The Australian War Memorial Act 1980, combined with Returned and Services League directives, confines ANZAC Day and the National Memorial strictly to uniformed personnel who served in conflicts abroad since Federation, thereby classifying frontier warriors as ineligible because their fight opposed the very settlement that established the modern state. This policy is not accidental. It safeguards the ANZAC ideal as a unifying symbol of sacrifice for the nation as it exists today, avoiding any implication that the country's foundations involved violent dispossession of the original inhabitants. At the same time, the same defense institutions have long incorporated the boomerang, an Aboriginal cultural and martial artifact, into army crests and formation symbols, starting with the ANZAC Manta Division in 1916. Unit insignia for signals, education, survey, armored, commando, cavalry, Royal Regiment, Dontroon, University, Light Horse and armored formations all feature the boomerang as a pride emblem. This appropriation transforms a weapon once deployed against invading forces into a decorative badge of Australian military tradition, without extending equivalent national honour to the Aboriginal people who originally wielded it in defence of their lands. Aboriginal communities approach this situation with measured fairness rather than outright rejection of ANZAC. Many Aboriginal people have enlisted and served with distinction in subsequent wars, earning separate plaques, ceremonies such as the annual For Our Country event, and state-level memorials that acknowledge their contributions within the uniformed services. Yet they rightly identify the double standard as deeply hypocritical. The Army celebrates the boomerang as a returning symbol of resilience in its honours while denying the Aboriginal resistance fighters, who mastered it, any parallel place in national mourning rituals. This selective embrace reveals an unwillingness to reconcile the ANZAC ethos with the full historical reality of conflict on Australian soil. The structural barrier persists despite calls for broader recognition, including recent commitments in the Australian War Memorial's expansion plans to depict frontier violence more deeply in pre-1914 galleries. Such incremental gestures do not alter the core refusal to integrate Aboriginal fallen into the ANZAC calendar or roll of honour, underscoring that the conflict of interests remains unresolved and the cultural appropriation continues unchecked. In summary, the obverse institutional opposition stems directly from ANZAC's defined boundaries clashing with frontier resistance history, and is compounded by the military's unacknowledged adoption of Aboriginal symbols, a position many Aboriginal voices critique as hypocritical while still affirming respect for overseas service traditions.